Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session. I think everyone here really deserves, I don't know, cookies or something. This is the last breakout session of the conference. I have actually had far too many cookies, so maybe what you deserve is a space free of additional sugar. Anyway, really nice to see everyone here, and warm welcome from me and from the panel, who I'm going to introduce in a minute. This is the session entitled Best Practice for Inclusion of Marginalized Voices and Protecting Human Rights. So if that's not where you think you should be, this would be a good time to maybe find a different room. I want to start by acknowledging that Carleton University is located on the traditional and unceded territories of the Algonquin Nation. I myself live in Cambridge, which is just outside of Toronto, and Cambridge is located on the territories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, which is, I've been practicing that, and it's a beautiful word, but very hard to say. So our session this afternoon really focuses on marginalization, inequality, and some of the structural barriers that people face as they try to access resources, services, and opportunities. And for me, I think the kind of acknowledgement that I was just making is really important because it reminds me that greater inclusion continues to be a struggle even in a place that I call home. So with that, again, a warm welcome to everyone. And this is my first conference in about 5 years, which is a little alarming to think. Maybe the same is true for some of you. So the face-to-face contact in the last 2 days has been really wonderful. And I've met some of you already, and hopefully the ones that I haven't met yet, I'll meet after the session. So without further ado, we have a terrific group of panelists here. They have really deep and varied expertise in different aspects of gender equality, social inclusion, and human rights. And I'm really, really pleased to have you here to hear about some of their experiences and some of their knowledge. You'll find a very detailed bio of each person on the CAIDP website. So I'm not going to give the very detailed version. Please jump on the website at some point and dig into that, but I'm going to give a high-level version. So on my far right, I'm really happy to introduce you to Diana Apollo. She is the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Technical Advisor with the World University Service of Canada, or WUSC. So her background includes experience in academia, in the private sector, and in NGOs, and she has background in both the humanitarian and development sectors. So welcome, Diana. On my far left, we have Shahryar Sarwar. He is the Deputy Director for Human Rights and Inclusion at Global Affairs Canada. His team ensures that Canada's international assistance integrates a human rights-based approach, and they do this by providing guidance and training on operationalizing the feminist international assistance policy. On my middle right, we have Brianna Parent-Long. She is a PhD student in the Department of Political Science at Carleton University, and she's also the Feminist Program Coordinator at VIDEA. On my middle left here, we have Sally Yacoub. Last but absolutely not least, she is an independent gender and financial inclusion consultant, and she has provided technical assistance on gender equality, diversity, equity, and inclusion to a wide range of organizations. I know her currently because she is a technical advisor for Alinia's Technical Assistance Partnership, or TAP initiative, and she's been working very collaboratively with Tunisia's Ministry of Women, Family, Children, and Seniors, and also with the Higher Planning Commission in Morocco. In fact, she's going to Morocco on the weekend. My name is Jennifer Denemy. I am going to be moderating this panel. I am a senior advisor in gender equality and social inclusion at Alinea International, where I support our global portfolio of projects. Alinea mainstreams gender equality in projects across all sectors, including our gender-responsive One Health programming in Kenya and Ethiopia, and inclusive nature-based solutions in the Lake Chad Basin. So, as you can see, this session is being recorded. If you remain in the session, then you've given consent to be part of the recording. I believe that the recording is going to focus on us, but if you're asking a question, then just be aware that you may be included in the recording as well. We're going to do our very best to save time for questions at the end. So hopefully you're going to have lots to ask and to engage in the discussion with the panelists. Okay, So my first question, Sally, is for you on inclusion. How do you approach inclusion in your work?
Well, what a privilege to be with you here today. I was really looking forward since the beginning of this week. Honestly, I had the privilege to be able to engage with different partners, organizations, individuals in different contexts, different sectors, no? And you get into a context, and one of the key first steps that I intentionally focus on is creating a common vision on inclusion. Obviously, I work on gender equality, social inclusion, financial inclusion. So this is the first starting stone in whatever partnership I get in. And I do it with a lot of intentionality, I would say. Now we come in and we land into context that have their existing structures, their existing context, their way of doing things, their way of living, their values. Beyond that tip of the iceberg, when we talk about culture, what lies beneath, no? Within those, there are embedded marginalizations, exclusions, discriminations that just exist within those systems, no? And we land there, right? With norms that generally sit at the heart of governing, creating, sustaining, and perpetuating inequalities. So to go there blindfolded without acknowledging the existence of those systems is dangerous work, because such, how can I say, rules of being actually are often dangerously and very intricately connected to sociocultural and religious values and norms. And these are untouchables. So to get into that water, we need to understand what it is that is within this tip of the iceberg. What is governing this? Why? What are the values? What are the norms? At least be norm aware, if not norm transformative, right? And then from there, that's the starting point to be able to understand also the stakeholders. Who are the different actors? Who are our partners? And where do they sit in those power dynamics, power structures? Power holders? Are they power seekers? Who are we handling? No, who are we dealing with, engaging with? What are their priorities, incentives? What are their objectives, eh? And this is by engaging with diverse groups of actors, and they are far from being homogeneous, right? Their perspectives, their voices, so it's about engaging very actively to understand the different voices and streams and perspectives within this context instead of putting people in predetermined boxes, no? That hard to come out with in our, mentally at least. So the starting point is, instead of coming with our own vision of inclusion, our own definition of inclusion, it's coming to that definition, joint definition together. That's the key part of doing this. Otherwise, in all honesty, this would be delusional to think that this is going to work. We're going to get into a chase of trying to, a futile chase trying to push partners, or maybe let them play the system to get the support, or get into conflict, or, it's not going to be something that towards the common objective, I would say. I would say as partners and facilitators, lastly, it's our job to find entry points. It's our job to find even the smallest entry points of change, to create this dialogue and space for dialogue and for change, and to find those change agents that can take us along that pathway. So our work, just to say, is about change and about change management, and it's hardly framed as such, but it's super important to think about that as we go. And I'll talk later. I also want to listen to my colleagues.
Great. Thank you so much, Sally.
Thank you, Jen.
Diana, my next question is for you.
Yes, hi.
So you're working within a specific system with the Technical Vocational Education and Training, or TVETs. Can you tell us how you're helping partners to build a more inclusive environment within those TVETs?
Yeah, sure. So as you have rightly said, TVET, and we already know that has some patriarchal nuances to it, very male-dominated in terms of decision-making and leadership. And so for us to even want to put females in it in terms of their programming or even into the industry, we have to understand what are those social, cultural, political, and economic barriers and exclusions that women face. We want to understand what does the labor market look like, what are those constraints, or what are those barriers that either exacerbate or reinforce the inequalities that limit either formal and informal, decent and productive work for women and girls. And before we even go into designing programs, we have to see what are the multiple stakeholders, what are their views, what are their perceptions, because how the project participants, in this case females, how they view it is very different from how their family and their relations view it, the community leaders, industry partners, right? The government, the CSOs. So all of these stakeholders do have something to benefit from it. And they also are coming in with their different perceptions, their different goals. And based on that, we have to see what are the commonalities, what are the differences before we even start to design our programming. And so you can see before we implement something, we have to kind of go through this process to really understand that context so that our initiatives can be as meaningful and as targeted as possible. And so through that, we start to see what are the gaps or what are the areas that we can, as you said, Sally, what are the entry points? You know, is it policy advocacy? Is it advocating for gender equality? Is it through engaging men and boys? Again, to create kind of that space that allows for participation, equal decision making, equitable access to resources. And then also, how do we want to meaningfully engage these people? So again, seeing that women and girls have been disempowered for a really long time, and here they are we're trying to achieve gender parity, and then all of a sudden we're talking about engaging men and boys in a way that might seem tokenistic in some instances. So how do we balance those in a place where they're the same people who are the gatekeepers, and we do need to get a shared understanding and a shared objective on creating that conducive environment for women and girls to participate, and at the same time for women and girls to really take on this process, right, and not just feel again like they're also being given like a token to address this. So in that process of having this multi-stakeholder engagements over and over, taking that feedback, designing, redesigning, planning, adapting, I think is where we really address that inclusion, because everyone's voice is heard, it's amplified, it's valued, and they're also able to see that reflected in the types of initiatives that we have. And I think with that, we're able to address also aspects of social norms. That is something that is huge in this type of sector. And so even if they do allow participation of females, allowing is one thing, but equitable access, right? We also want leadership, we want decision making, we want equitable access to roles and responsibilities, we want them to be able to understand what their rights are, and they're able to make strategic choices. And so you can see there's so many different layers, and it's going to take quite some time to do this. And so having all these stakeholders on board and bringing in their different expertise is really important in understanding that process. And I think that's kind of what inclusion is about. So the project becomes their project by them, and we just become facilitators and eventually kind of taper off to allow them to be sustainable. And I think that's what we need to think about in some of the initiatives that we're implementing.
Great, great. And I love the commonality of the entry points and the meaningful engagement.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Diana. Brianna, can you tell us about how inclusion is built into the very structure of your organization, Videa, in a way that nurtures both staff and their knowledge?
Yeah, I always love to start these conversations by talking about the fact that I'm nervous. I think like putting words to how we're feeling tells other people in the room that even if they're nervous, they can also do this, like currently shaking. But, and I also like to talk about the fact that I am talking from a script, and that before I go on panels, I ask people to give me a set of questions that they're not going to change. I am very neurodivergent, and I like to be prepared. I like to also be consistent with what I'm saying and intentional with what I'm saying. And that's the first step of inclusion, is making sure that people that you're inviting to speak feel prepared and don't feel like they're going to get a gotcha question or something that, and it's not because people are prepared, but it's so that they can feel prepared and feel like they can show up the way that they feel most comfortable. So I am very lucky to work with such a special and amazing organization. Videa has a staff of just over 50 people, and we focus on tackling global human rights issues through a feminist and decolonial lens that really challenges traditional ways of working. Our organization, like we believe others should, starts from the base of recognizing that international development is inherently colonial. And is stocked with a lot of performative rather than meaningful change, and that is what we want to focus on deconstructing. We value being represented by the people our programs serve. So at Vidia, more than 50% of our staff and board are First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. 29 of our staff identify as people with disabilities. 15 have identified as 2S LGBTQ+, and 9 are permanent staff members from the Global South. Relationship building and inclusion, I believe, are hand in hand. We have an accountability to the people that we work with, past and present, and this is why Vidia recruits our staff, board, and future program participants from past program participant base first, ensuring that those with lived experiences of the issues that we work on lead our programs, but also ensuring that we are remaining accountable to the people that we are bringing into our community, and that we are challenging a sector that is not always safe for youth, especially youth that are challenging these norms. I think that times we value numbers and quote unquote diversifying our programs over relationship building, which often means that there's short-term relationships that are being built that are being discarded after scheduled programming is done. And so we need to challenge this way that we're working. At my organization, we believe that young people should have their voices heard, and we are willing to stand up against the silences and exclusions of youth in the sector. So we work to make sure that youth are really given the opportunity to excel. And so this means that when we are advocating for youth in the sector, that inclusion into traditionally and continually colonial spaces is harmful for youth, and it's also like very emotionally draining. This is why at our organization we try to make sure that we have several wellness spaces that are available to youth in our community. We have monthly global storytelling where people convene online and just talk about themselves, share a story about their family or their experience or whatever comes to them. We also have Indigenous Wellness Wednesdays, which is a space every Wednesday where Indigenous people come together and share a meal, a provided meal, and do a different activity together. Our Facebook page for that has 236 people, and every week we bring together 40 to 50 people, and this is an exclusive Indigenous space. Our team meetings are also very unique. They're not, what are you doing right now at work? They are, what is your favorite plant? How can we best get to know one another so that we feel comfortable working in this space together? Obviously, there are times where we're talking about work, but we have 2 dedicated spaces per week where we are just getting to know one another. And we have things like Christmas get-togethers, because when we're bringing marginalized people into our community, that means that sometimes it's supporting them through things like holidays. So organizing virtual get-togethers on Christmas or on other holidays where people might feel a little disconnected from community. We want to bring that community together because we think that people thrive and are most successful when they're accommodated, where they pick their own hours and they work in spaces that are safe and comfortable for them. This means staff working in their home territories, starting work later because they have to drive their kids to school, working evenings because they have other jobs they need to work, or having other flexible spaces that honor other caregiving roles and other time zones, because asking people to join meetings at 3 a.m. While our Global North staff get to join during scheduled work times, making sure that we're really challenging those. And finally, one key thing that stands out when we're talking about inclusion is proper compensation. That's why at my organization we've tried to move from honorariums and volunteering to staff position for all programs, because people deserve to be compensated and compensated fairly for their investment and their exchange of knowledge. And so we pay over a living wage for the people who are in our organization. Further, we realized that a big barrier to participation with people who are quote unquote in marginalized communities is food. So a lot of our budgets, we put in lines for food, like skip cards or e-transfers or wire transfers. Because if we're expecting people to show up and participate in these spaces, we have to make sure they have a full tummy and they feel like they have the the resources to participate in a way that they want to and that they feel most comfortable with. And yeah, that starts with food. So yeah, that's me.
Great, thank you. Some really good day-to-day things and some big picture things as well. Great. Thanks, Brianna. Shahryar.
Hi.
Hi. How does your team at Global Affairs Canada contribute to the protection of human rights, to the inclusion of marginalized voices in Canada's international assistance?
Thank you, Jennifer. Happy to take on that question, but Brianna, by framing international development as inherently colonial, has just made my job a little bit harder. So I'm going to do my best, though. It's going to be uphill. As you described in your opening remarks and in our introductions, we are an internal resource within Global Affairs Canada. Our work on human rights and inclusion is intended for our colleagues across the department and by extension to influence the work that we do overseas. It's governed by Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy, or FIAP. I'm sure that over the past 2 days, everyone has heard a lot about the FIAP, so I probably don't need to go into that. We provide policy advice to our corporate divisions. We engage in capacity building activities across the department, and we deliver technical support to teams that work on multilateral and bilateral projects across the world. This includes humanitarian assistance, international development, and peace and security operations. So we work on the triple nexus, as it were. We adopt a human rights-based approach. That is, we try to integrate an approach that sees, or a lens that sees all project stakeholders as rights holders or duty bearers. And we try to ensure that projects have that integrated approach as they're being developed and planned with the external partner. We also work on 2 current ministerial priorities: disability inclusion and LGBTQ inclusion and support. This would change, of course, with a change in government, because these priorities go back and forth on a political level. We also manage a small portfolio, a modest portfolio of projects ourselves, mostly in LGBTQ programming and support. And I can speak more to those later on. In terms of context, we should consider our approach to be inside Agenda 2030's Leave No One Behind. And it is consistent with the UN Common Understanding on a Human Rights-Based Approach to Development. In terms of integration of human rights, we try to go into the process, the outcome, and the goals of the project by applying principles such as participation and inclusion, equality and non-discrimination, transparency and accountability in all the projects. And as I mentioned earlier, the approach that we take is intersectional. This allows us to support programs and policies that can adequately address needs and priorities of those affected by compounding and intersecting factors and identities, and intersecting forms of discrimination. And those are, in our opinion or in our experience, most likely the communities to be left behind, and those are the subject of our work.
Great, thank you. So that's a little bit about the context and about how people define inclusion. And now we're going to get into some of the challenges, some of the actual nitty-gritty of the work, and I guess where the rubber hits the road a little bit. Diana, we're going to start with you. So TVETs are a potentially challenging environment. Mm-hmm. You're focusing on TVETs as an avenue for girls and young women to gain skills and a pathway for employment. So talk to us about some of the specific challenges for inclusion in TVETs and in some pretty traditionally male sectors.
Excellent. Yep. So the challenges are quite many. So if you had enough, just tell me to stop. So I think one of the key ones that I would think of top of mind would be training as a source of fatigue. So WISC is training, Alenia is training, GIZ, World Vision, everyone is training. And that's a good thing, but it also can be a bad thing because we're not really able to point out the clear benefits and the kind of results of training, especially when we're talking about engaging men and boys. So again, it's been seen as tokenistic, it's been seen as reactionary, it's been seen as, are we somewhat taking away privilege and power? Are we somewhat kind of disempowering other groups as we are empowering maybe another group that already was empowered, right? So there's some sort of underlying tensions that could come as a result of this. And these also are aligned with misconceptions about gender equality. So are we trying to threaten kind of or destabilize the status quo? So again, remember, even if you think of yourself, if you've been kind of privileged or have access to something, and here you are being convinced or swayed to share that space, but not understanding why you're sharing that space, I think can have a bit of a trick situation there, where if you think about aspects of sustainability also, it might not be thought through. Because again, if these people do not see the change, do not see themselves as part of the process, will it be sustainable when the financial or technical support has tapered off at some point, right? So I think those are some of the things that we have to think through. We do see structural issues, as I spoke about. So men being in decision and leadership roles and processes whereby they go off checking that, okay, well, so yes, we do want women to enter the non-traditional high-income, high-growth sectors. So what WSC is saying, or what people are saying, is that they need to have separate changing rooms, separate washrooms, and all of that. Yes, they do put that in place, but they don't think through the process of how do they make this safe for these women? How do they ensure that they're sanitary bins? How do they ensure that they're lockable to ensure that there are no chances or risk factors to increase gender-based violence or sexual harassment? How do they ensure that there's water, and soap, and just small things that maybe they might not think through, but they do not involve the right people in those negotiations or consultations. Thinking through aspects of even gender-based violence. So yes, okay, we'll go ahead and put in a suggestion box or complaints box, but you do not have kind of designated persons who are technically trained to address these sensitive topics and or be able to refer out. Having survivor-centered approach and support services, they don't have those as well. So you find that yes, in the grand scheme of things, it looks like they're doing a really good job, but are these places really safe for women and girls in kind of looking at the overall well-being of their process in accessing these high growth sectors? We also do see some sort of backlash, again, thinking through the aspect of tokenism, right? So historically, again, women and girls have been kind of marginalized, and then it'll take us about 100 years before we're able to close that gender gap, right? But if you really think through the process of engaging men and boys programming right now, there's a lot of backlash that's coming out because of, again, that fear of taking away power, taking away privilege from people who have predominantly had it. And so that in itself, if you think about our longevity in our programming or sustainability of our programming, it might not augur well in those contexts. So are they going to be able to own up and take up change, be part of that process over a long period of time? And in that case, what does that look like? Are we already equipping them to do that? Are we using existing structures, as Sally mentioned, or are we trying to kind of impose new things? And so I think in this process of challenges, those will always be there, but how do we mitigate those challenges on a consistent basis and ensuring that we are continuing to engage the same actors? Because sometimes I think when problems arise, we think that we have the solutions for it, not thinking through that the people who are actually living in that context are better placed to address this. Because again, we're just temporary actors, especially when we're looking at that systems approach where we want them to really be able to influence those systems moving forward, and for us to really just be kind of temporary actors. So it's really important to look at those different aspects: the economic aspect, political aspect, political will, leadership, social, cultural norms, again, a very big thing, whereby we know we're making steps, but again, people kind of, they move to defaults, right? Default settings, which is, again, is the patriarchal society, social norms, with women and girls kind of being held the shorter end of the stick. And in that case, again, having additional barriers to kind of overcome. And so just thinking through that process over a period of time on an ongoing basis, taking that feedback from the different stakeholders and refining and adapting as needed. And I think most people here have probably implemented programs during COVID, right? We never thought that some of these courses, even in TVET, would be provided remotely or even in kind of some sort of hybrid way. So really thinking through this process and utilizing those resources that are already on the ground and allowing them to be creative, to be innovative, to be adaptable, and allowing them also to test out certain things. They might not all work, but even in failing, we do learn and are able to look for opportunities.
Great. So flexibility, but also keeping your eye on the end goal and building support as you move that way.
Absolutely.
Great. Great. Thank you. Brianna. Feminism and decolonization are really important parts of your work. You've encountered firsthand how important it is to make space for these conversations, but also how there are structures in place that can really challenge implementation there. Can you talk to us a little bit about this?
Yeah, I think that we've seen a really big shift towards more talks about decolonization and feminism and involving youth. And I think that inclusion is really important to those conversations, but that a lot of interactions in this sector with Indigenous and Black folks are hostile. They're asking them to solve the colonial problem while positioning colonialism as an event, a point in time, or something tangible that we can see an end to. And I think that this is also happening while we're creating spaces that are simply not accessible to many of the knowledge keepers that should be in the room with us right now and that are making changes in this sector. These spaces involve expensive and smart clothes that we are all currently wearing, hundreds of dollars in conference fees. And I think that spaces like these are a convening of people who have the means to be here rather than necessarily a convening of knowledge keepers who should be here. I think that at just about every conference I attend, I always have one or a few people come up to me and be like, "You look like a familiar face. Can we talk?" I feel very alienated in this space because this space is largely a convening of people who look a certain way or represent a certain demographic. So I think that we are preaching inclusion and we are getting there, but we need to ask, where is it? Why aren't there more marginalized people and youth in the spaces that we are creating? What barriers are being put in place? And I think that our wellness structures at IDEA are recognizing the fact that this sector, and as settlers, asks so much of Indigenous and Black folks and Global South folks. There's the ask to educate us, to rethink our approaches, but seldom does this sector provide the care needed after a space that requires these folks to bare their souls and hearts in the name of educating us with care. Marginalized people are not machines. We need understanding, healing, space, and care. And so this seemingly inclusion or move towards inclusion without structural change means that we are more and more times asking people to do a lot of emotional labor on top of their job-based labor and not providing the tools to support their recovery or compensate that work. Marginalized people don't get to close their laptops or walk out of this room and go into the world and not experience racism and colonialism. It is not a fact that lives within a tangible space. It is just a reoccurring experience for many people. Another barrier to inclusion, I think, is the adoption of buzzwords like decolonization and feminism without intentionally or unintentionally committing the space and resources needed to realize this work. Decolonization is not a synonym for anti-racism, and it is not an endpoint. It's not a 2-day workshop or a 5-year strategic plan, or through violently extracting knowledge from overseas partners in localization efforts. It is at home. It's in our boards, our policies, our people. It is in the benefits and relationships that we as individuals and as organizations have on and with the land, and really looking inward before we are asking how we can possibly decolonize outwardly in our programs. This requires a fundamental shift in the sector's priorities and recognizing that it is a journey on its own that is a complete restructuring of our approaches, structures, and understandings of the land and relationships with the land. On the feminism standpoint, I was once a speaker on a panel on intersectionality, and we had a lot of discussions about feminism and what feminism do we need and what does that look like. And there were a lot of conversations referencing a need to find commonalities, to not focus so much on identity and to form this quote-unquote global sisterhood. These ideas, I will say over and over again, make me feel very helpless when I'm in the sector. And the direction that feminism is taking when it's being implemented into our organization, because the sisterhood that is often spoken of is a homogenized sisterhood that seeks to erase the unique challenges of people across the world and make mostly, as the framework has demonstrated for global sisterhood, white liberal feminists remain comfortable with a feminism in which they get to maintain their power in the hierarchy rather than challenge it altogether. It's a way to be prescriptive and say sameness unites us and we can find a common goal, but who sets this goal? Does this goal seek to assimilate people into what the sector wants feminism and international development to look like? And I think this means really asking ourselves, there's a lot of questions these past couple days about funding. What does funding look like if it gets cut? And asking ourselves the question, are we ready to stop traveling, to stop being paid expensive per diems and accommodations, and are we willing to transfer power to the people that we are working with and have trust that they are able to deliver the programs and know what's best for them? Because how much of a budget are we spending traveling that could be spent towards implementing sustainable changes? Which is an uncomfortable question, but it's one that we have to ask ourselves.
And I was just going to say, thank you for asking us some uncomfortable questions. I don't even need to say that. Thank you, Brianna. Shahryar, in this uncomfortable space, what challenges do you face in your work as an internal resource and building capacity within GAC on inclusion and human rights? What are some of the opportunities that you can build on?
There's lots of challenges, and I'm just going to name a couple of them here. That's what we have time for. And they're practical ones, which I think will resonate with most people. You know, it's a department of almost 15,000 employees spread across 110 countries. And to meaningfully educate everyone in human rights, in a human rights-based approach or an intersectionality is a challenge. We often find that even in programming divisions, programming teams that work directly with external partners, this approach and these principles are a surprise to them sometimes. It tends to be a siloed department in many cases. People work within their own little chamber, and there's often not the cross communication that you would expect a department like this. So it's partly the size and the sprawl of the department that gives us a challenge. Nonetheless, we have created tools. We've created analytical guidance for people inside the department. We've created training courses, and we deliver those training courses, or we have facilitators deliver them for us. And we publish those tools on our internal-facing website, but also for our public-facing website for external partners. So, for instance, an HRBA checklist, Human Rights-Based Approach checklist, exists on our public website. And any partner can go to the website and say, okay, this is what I need to make sure the project has integrated into it in order to be truthful to human rights-based principles. So we're trying to overcome the logistical challenge of capacity building our own colleagues. So that's one. And then I would say another one is a political challenge, the challenge of scarce resources and ensuring that the political government of the day tries to be aligned with or we are aligned with the principles that we hold dear, and to ensure that there is some funding and resources allocated to those priorities. In this instance, as I mentioned in my previous response, you know, there is a commitment to human rights-based approaches. There is a commitment to supporting LGBTQ communities. There's a commitment to a feminist approach to international development, commitment to disability inclusion. With a change in government or a change of priorities, these are not guaranteed by any means. And so we are cognizant that at any given time, these priorities may be subject to some sort of shift. We are supposed to give fearless advice, but also to loyally implement once that advice has been received and a policy direction taken. I also want to mention, and I'm borrowing heavily from Brianna here, decolonizing our approach. And I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that Global Affairs or Canada is decolonizing its approach. I don't think we're doing that. However, we are trying to work on localization approaches. We're trying to work more with smaller partners. We're trying to seek ways of including the voice or amplifying the voice of local partners. We're trying to ensure a collaborative approach as opposed to a here's some money, now do this kind of approach. These are nascent attempts, and I don't know how far we've got in these. The previous panel, I think, featured my friend and colleague Anne Germain and others who are working on the innovation side of our department. Our great transformation exercise is ongoing, it's underway, and these are some of the things that we're looking at. And hopefully at the other end of this, we will come up with an approach that is a little bit more open, a little bit more accessible, and tries to create a balanced playing field for partners and for global affairs alike. I think that everyone understands that we are constrained by some of the risk tolerance and the financial accountability tools that apply across the government of Canada, to which we are also subject, and to which we also have to subject our partners. And so working within those constraints, I think that global affairs is trying to create a shift here in the way we approach things.
Great, thank you. There's some promising direction, but understanding that it takes time to move a ship that's 15,000 people and then some.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sally, what are some of the barriers to and challenges in promoting inclusion that you've encountered in your work?
Thank you so much. I have so many trains in my thoughts, also with the brilliant contributions right here. And I was so happy to also I mean, institutional inertia, also with Diana when she was mentioning the reflective approach. Gender equality and social inclusion is such a reflective, there's no recipe. So it's more of an art, and how can you, the first challenge is how to reach that common vision. I'm engaged in one context in Cameroon, and we're working on a feminist approach. And you have to, first of all, feminism, I'll go back a little bit. First of all, is creating that common vision. Where are our commonalities? No, because what is feminist? What is a Cameroonian feminist? What is a Moroccan feminist? What is a Filipino feminist? There's this common vision. That's the first. How can we get there to our so many human commonalities? No, and how can we get to that? One. The second is what we say matters a lot. There are so many preconceived notions, and Diana had also alluded to that, about gender and gender equality, social inclusion. What does it mean? Is it against men? Is it against my religion? Is it against my values as a local person? Is it which one is it? You know, and so getting to talk about those myths first. The second is being so conscious about our own identity and what we say, how, in what way, with what framing, and who's saying it within our identity as we project certain shadows from how we're saying it and who's funding it and how it can be locally perceived. This is so key. Again, this is so linked when it comes to gender equality. I wish it were like a misconception about an economic concept. That would pass, eh? But when you're talking about a land of taboos, no? You're really tiptoeing on a land of taboos. That's directly contradicting and in conflict with one's own, values, with one's own norms, with one's own religion. So one has to make sure what we're saying, how we're saying it. The terminology matters a lot. I had somebody in one of my interviews in one of my local research stop me in the middle. Can you just not use LGBTIQ+? That's just a Western term. It doesn't resonate with us. It creates barriers. Don't use it, please. Feminism, that's blasphemy in many, many, many contexts. So how we say it, what we say, in what way, what framing, what do we mean by it, and finding ways that are acceptable, that can be locally based. If we're not relevant in the context we're in, we're creating barriers, we're actually increasing the barriers for change rather than lowering it. Eh? We're creating more, like, how can you say, increasing the inertia. I want to say that we are there. First of all, gender equality, social inclusion is usually seen as a cost center, unfortunately, as a cost center. As a cost center, it's not, the price tag, unfortunately, is not there, unfortunately. So you're always seen as something extra that I have to do more for, and why would I do that? So that we have to bear in mind. So building the place is always there. Negotiating, facilitating the spark of change. Where can we find sparks for change and change agents that can take us in that pathway, supporting, advocating, making them speak for their own vision, supporting them in finding that joint vision with them leading, not us. They don't need saving. They're well where they are. So finding enlightened versions that are locally based examples, anchored in the local context, that are more enlightened, that are more inclusive, that are more, towards the inclusive version that is non-threatening, the use of non-threatening. It's not a zero-sum game, building some commonalities in a way that can actually make change easier. Building trust, I find this sits at the heart of what we do, and building trust with our partners, where we are actually there to sincerely appreciate, genuinely appreciating the ways of living, the ways of working, even if we disagree with it. We don't have to agree with everything, but we can respect it. We can respect existing expertise, existing capacities, no? Co-creation, sincere co-creation, it's exactly the term I was saying. It's like, no, take that, and I'm there to tell you what you need to know. I'm there to educate you. I'm there to raise your awareness because you know nothing in between the lines. So respecting and honoring existing values and finding that way towards our community. True partnership to there to be truly listening and actively supporting them in achieving their objective while adding that additional lens to inclusion that will open doors to others. Last is mind. I'm so aware of the trends to try, because of the complexity of change and social change. We try to flatten it sometimes. We try to make it linear sometimes. We do, unfortunately, some knee-jerk reactions or knee-jerk expectations to fast-forward change, and we want it to happen, transformative approaches that can happen in 2 years, in 6 months, in 6 years even. That takes time. We'll have to adjust our expectations. And then, mind you, be careful of the cause-effect, that we can push to try and, for accountability purposes. I know there are no ill intentions, but we have to find ways to manage that differently, so as not to flatten change, to put cause and, there are so many others to say, but I want to listen to my colleagues, so thank you.
Thank you, Sally.
And
I'm really struck by hearing, I love what Sally said, that working on social change is an art, and each of the speakers has a very different perspective and different way of working, and they're all complementary in a way, but very different. Thank you. So, just keeping an eye on the time, which is running away from us, I want to finish with some things that give you hope. And so I've asked each of our panelists to share a success story, something that they've seen that gives them hope, and that they can see that the direction of the work is positive and is going somewhere that's beneficial. Brianna, I'm going to call on you first. What do you want to share that gives you hope? What's working?
Yeah, I think that there's so much hope, and I think a lot of that hope starts with so much bravery, and the bravery that we all have within us to change the sector, challenge the sector, do amazing work. I've seen firsthand the ways in which Indigenous leaders are challenging the foundation that this sector stands on, and they're doing it with such bravery and perseverance. There are so many things that Indigenous people have known since time immemorial that are now making their way into the sector. So sustainable solutions for climate change. Indigenous people across Turtle Island and across the world have known what sustainable solutions to climate change look like. And so I've seen that when they're given the space, they're challenging and making the sector so amazing. And I have the absolute honor to work with a vast variety of Indigenous peoples whose knowledge is just so beautiful and innovative and creative, and their approaches just go so beyond what I can learn in academia or what this sector can even imagine. And it's approaches that are rooted in wellness and traditional teachings, medicine, decolonization, and continuous and intentional connection to the land. One of the just absolutely phenomenal people who, just a little note, every time I talk to them I cry. I cannot tell you why, but they are just like so powerful, and they said to me that intention does not match impact. And we need to be focusing on the impact that we're having as a sector. And I've seen that when these emerging leaders are given the tools to succeed, they don't just succeed, they excel in the face of everything. And so many of the youth that are Indigenous youth in our in our organization specifically, who traditionally would not meet the requirements that are set out by job descriptions in the sector, are transforming the sector. They are now on ECCC's board. They are now on the Prime Minister's Youth Council. They are delivering the Indigenous Peoples Caucus speech at COP. This is powerful. This is how we rethink what knowledge means. Methodologically, VIDEA diverges from traditional results-based management tools. We are firmly committed to nurturing different knowledge forms and elevating different knowledge systems that are outside formal academia and don't necessarily align with the word expert criteria that's established in the field, but nonetheless, they are creating sustainable and inclusive approaches that are transforming the ways that we are working in the sector. We adopt co-created tools based on program and community-specific needs. This sometimes means using two-eyed seeing approaches or sharing circles, or co-creating program expectations instead of using things like post-programming surveys. And donors are becoming more receptive towards this because they are getting challenged on their ways of working for the first time. It is in this descent. Things continue to operate the way that they do when we smooth the belt in which it's operating. We need to throw the belt away. And I was saying one of our programs that is Cards on Indigenous Wisdom, it's a program that was funded by WAGE called Shared Wisdom, and it is still being talked about years later because it was community driven, community designed, community compensated, and I just, these are things that cannot be explained with numbers. Because how do you measure connection to the land or increase community connection and grounding? You can't measure this, but we can meaningfully talk about it and about change and having different knowledge systems that lead to us not working in silos. And one of the examples that came to my mind when I was talking to Jennifer, which was a grant proposal that I wrote a couple of weeks ago, and I was writing it and I wrote this long list of activities and they were boring. They were so boring. And I consulted with one of my colleagues, and they said, well, why don't we do 3 workshops that are harvesting and processing, connecting people directly to the land? Why don't we do one that's on mushroom occultation? Why don't we do one that's on hydroculture building? And I was like, oh, I could never think about that. I don't think I could even research to find that. And it's through that actual engagement, that not working in silos, that this sector is just changing and becoming beautiful. And I think that in relation to our praxis of caring with the land, what does caring for the land mean? We are finding things that work, and this is why VIDEA is an anti-capitalist organization. We recognize that the sector needs to fundamentally examine and firmly reject its hypocritical relationship it has with the corporate sector. We value our independent voice and protect our financial autonomy from political or corporate interests. And that means that we can't talk solidarity with land defenders, decolonization, and feminism in one breath, while accepting funds from corporations who greenwash themselves with the next and who are actively committing assault on the land and are funding the oil and gas industry and other extractive industries that enable and bankroll the violence against the land, against Indigenous people, against women, girls, and LGBTQ plus people. So we prioritize decolonial practices and people over that profit, which can sometimes be difficult, and it's not the easiest financial solution, it's not always these easiest financial solutions that are most inclusive, accessible, or friendly to the land. It's the ones that are really hard and difficult. And I recognize that though this may be uncomfortable to say, I am still sweating, and uncomfortable to hear, it's necessary. I think sometimes we mistake comfortability with being with like-minded people, but we need to be uncomfortable. And if everyone in your organization or at your conference table is aligned and moving in the same direction, then what innovation is being added to the sector? It's not innovation. You're just thinking like everyone else at that point, if everyone's agreeing. Having dissenting voices in our organization is what challenges us to grow. Having youth in the sector is what tells us that the ways that we work are not and have never been sustainable. And these conversations are powerful. Humility is powerful. And I think another thing that we've learned from COVID-19 is that we are capable of having people work remotely, which means there are no excuses anymore for not having Global South people permanently on your staff. You can do that now. So we're going to stop having short-term consultancies, and we're going to actually properly compensate people for their knowledge and their time and their expertise that they are bringing to our sector and our organizations.
Well, that was a hopeful vision that was also uncomfortable. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you, Brianna. Shahryar, your work and your vision is quite different, but I think that there are some areas of alignment. Can you tell us about maybe one of your key successes that you've seen recently?
Thanks, Jennifer. One of our homegoing programs, and this borrows heavily from Brianna's example. It's great that I get to go right after. I can riff off what she just said. A program built by the community that it serves is our 2S LGBTQI plus international assistance program. It's kind of a model for our department. It's ongoing, and it's a 5-year program, 2020 to 25, so it's entering its final year. Announced in 2019 by then Minister, committing $30 million over these 5 years to SLGBTQI plus communities and initiatives. Very heavily collaborated with the community and with local organizations, both within Canada and overseas in the countries where they work, and intended to target these communities in a way that they haven't been targeted before. So we've had some programs that support LGBTQ plus communities, but in what we call an integrated fashion, which means that there's a larger project or initiative, and some part or some portion of it might just touch upon the needs and aspirations of those communities. We don't know how much because it's integrated within a larger project. But this this program intends to be targeted. It only counts as targeted initiatives, and those that are consulted with these communities and agreed to by them in the countries of operation. So I'd say that this is a big success, and I think the success of it is that it is for the communities and by the communities, to the extent that we can within our own frameworks, the limitations of which I pointed out in my previous response. So given that framework, I think we're doing a reasonably good job. It's a pilot, and when it comes to an end next year, we intend to have a proper assessment and lessons learned exercise to see what we can do going forward, and what we can do better going forward. The commitment from the minister was 30 million over 5 years, and then 10 million a year thereafter, with an open-ended sort of commitment. Of course, again, caveating that with my earlier response about political priorities and resource allocation and where they stand with the political government of the day. But I would say, and I'm happy to talk further about this, that this would be one success story that builds on the knowledge and the experiences of the people it affects.
Great. A real glimmer of hope. Thank you. Diana, we're coming back to you. Hi. So we're a little short on time. So what I want you to do is to tell us one of your success stories, both from the perspective of your program, perhaps an organization or one of the women that you've worked with.
Sure. So I think at the individual level, what I love to hear most is that women saying to me, you know, because I attended this training, you know, I feel so confident in what I'm doing. I feel that I'm able to compete. I feel that I'm able to be successful. I feel that I can make my own decisions. I know when somebody looks at me the wrong way. I know where I can report it. I feel that I can't be harassed. To me, that is power. I think they can conquer anything they want, right? Because they have all those pieces in their life that they can make those strategic decisions, and they know that if any of their rights are violated, they know where to report, and they know that they can hold that organization accountable for that mistake, right? And then for that person, the perpetrator, to be held accountable as well. So I think that in itself just gives me hope to understand that this is actually working. That yes, despite all the challenges, you know, that there's some ray at the end of the tunnel, and that people are really appreciating this process, and they're able to transform their own lives. At the organizational level, I think I've seen a man who's had his business for 50 years. He has never hired women because it's in the automotive industry. And last year, he had the first batch come in as trainees. And this year, he has actually made structural changes. He's actually built separate washrooms and changing rooms and a baby diaper station, breastfeeding station, childcare section, where he's saying, you know what, I never even thought of my daughters being able to do this work, but I want other women to be able to do this and transform this industry. So in his industry, of course, he's the leader, but also in his community, he's the leader. To his children, he's the leader, right? And I think that for him being in his 70s and almost 80s, to make that decision at this point, I think says a lot, not just for him, but I think for just the entire sector, that norms can change. How we perceive things can change. How we create opportunities can change. And so we might see it as, from the organizational point of view, as maybe as a donor, we might see it as, oh, okay, well, you know, he had a little bit of funding here and there. But I think it's such a major change and shift in him as an individual, and for the people and the generations after him, his sons and sons-in-law and his great-grandsons and all of that. And I think that in itself has created a precedence in that sector, you know, for more people to kind of seek funding or to seek support in how can we start a child care center within our organization. It's not that large, but what can we do? What kind of policies can we put in place to ensure that women feel safe? They don't feel like they're being harassed. They feel that they have protected while they're here. So I feel like that in itself is something that's really major in that industry, in that project, but in that country as a whole. I think it's really transforming how they're looking at it and not seeing themselves as a small SME or a small organization that's not able to make change. I think they're seeing themselves as pioneers, really, even if it's, you know, how many years later, it's never too late to make that change.
And they're really seeing the value of the change
Absolutely.
and investing in it in meaningful ways in their business and their community.
Absolutely. And you know what? That change is going to outlive them.
Yes.
Right? So it
Yeah.
wasn't there 50 years ago. It's there now. And who knows, 100 years from now, it's still going to be there. I think that's the important thing.
And people's mindsets.
Absolutely.
Yes.
To see the value of it themselves, right? And to see why it's important and to really put in the measures to have those in place and to understand why it's there, right? So not checking off a box that WISC wants us to do this, but to really see that, oh, we've not had this, but by having these people, these are the values, these are the positive advantages that we're getting from it. And so we need to include this for A, B, C, D, kind of long-term thinking, I think is what's important here. The sustainability piece that we keep talking about, right? So it's not like this is a space that, you know, can be moved tomorrow. This is a structure that's going to stay. Like if you're going to bring it down, bring the whole building down, right? So I think it's just really for them to understand what that need is to really put in place resources. And if you're committing money to something, it means it's important to you, right? And to see how that is going to grow, I think I would want to go back maybe 5 years from now just to see what are they doing. Because if in 1 year they've made that shift, then I think I have a lot of hope to see that they're going to make other great changes.
Imagine 5. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Diana. Sally, we're going to give you the last word, and then we're going to go to some questions, I hope. Jessie is often quite abstract, particularly for those who are not specialists. Can you tell us about some of your recent work with the researchers in Morocco and how you supported them to grasp and incorporate a gender lens into their work?
I'll be a fast train because I want to hear your questions. The first was with Morocco. It's with the High Commission for Planning. That's the name. It's a quasi-government institution that is a knowledge producer. They produce statistics for the government, for policymakers. And so the first thing was to demystify what's gender equality and social inclusion. Is it sex desegregated data? We have women in our research, women data collectors in our research. Is this enough? Is that it? We have women's participation, women's economic participation in the economy. Is that enough? What does it actually mean? So understand creating a common language. We start with that common language. What do we mean by it? And then finding that common objective. They want to inform their policymakers with the research and statistics they produce. How about adding an intersectional gender lens to that, an inclusive lens to that, and that will mean that it's more pertinent, more tailored recommendations, better statistics and better research for them, exactly resonating with what Diana was saying. Why is it important? So it's no longer cost center. It's actually getting you to do your job with just an additional lens to it. And I would say that starting with and they asked me, why do you need consultations? I asked, as a starting point, I need to consult with various groups of your organization and other stakeholders. They said, why waste time with that? Well, if it's not like grounded in what you do in your work processes, in your objectives, in your existing structures, then our work will be like something that is added, a parallel thing. The best thing is to marry those two together and add that lens and make it tailored to their existing structures so it becomes less abstract and something that they can actually do tomorrow. So based on that co-partnership, and an understanding of where they are, we have to meet them where they are, right? And with their processes and how they work with existing structures and systems, and then through an interdisciplinary approach while valuing their expertise as statisticians and researchers, how can we add that additional lens that they don't have expertise in and break it down into steps that are applicable and add this new reflex to it that they cannot unsee. I bet you this is gonna haunt them, and I saw it in their eyes, and that's what made me. They cannot unsee it in their next research. And that's the best thing, is to create it in existing ones. And in that awareness, the light bulbs that are going to be there, those new sets of glasses that they will continue to have all the time. So it's very interdisciplinary. We have to intersect with where they are. And it was about then taking that tool and being trained with them, because it's capacity exchange, not capacity building, not capacity development. And coaching and being coached in the meantime on how to apply it and how to make it relevant within their sectors and how to tweak it within those, applying the knowledge on their ongoing research that they have on the ground so they can learn it by doing, and I learn it by doing. So it's a knowledge and perspective exchange. I'm going to Morocco on Saturday, so sorry for the planes. But, yeah.
It's not the planes.
No, but yeah. So I thank you so much.
Thank you, Sally. Okay, well, I think we have, Kendra, is there another session starting to, no? Good, then we have some time for questions. Excellent.
Start. Everybody's here, so everybody's in this room. So. I was in the other.
I think there may be closing remarks.
Okay.
We're supposed to reconvene there at 4:45.
Okay.
Which is now. Okay, we'll have a couple of very quick questions, and then we will, as a group, go over for the closing remarks.
More than a question, Sally, thank you so much for what you mentioned about language. So I'm going to share about my experience. My first time in a conference like this one, and I must confess, especially today, has been a little bit apprehensive for me, because the way we use the language is uttering it. Listening all the time, decolonization, it has made me feel all the time like an outsider. I'm from a developing country, so I don't want to be recognized like a quota. We have people from global south. I'm sorry, but I don't want to be recognized like that. I'm a competent woman, skilled professional, so I don't want to be I understand that we're trying to like foster inclusion, but we are excluding people, making them different. So thank you for bringing that up. Like language is really important, and how we present things make people feel included or excluded. So thank you.
Great point. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So for Brianna, I just wanted to say I really appreciated the perspective that you brought. I don't think it's one we've heard a lot from at the conference, and I agree with it very much. And maybe it's a product of both of us being in academia at the moment and being kind of exposed to a lot of these ideas and theories that may have not yet been, I guess, translated into the professional part of the sector. But I'm wondering about your organization, and if you could, like, would you envision any challenges if, like, expanding it or getting bigger? Would you imagine maybe more like, if the sector would change, would it be more of a collective of these kind of smaller organizations similar to yours, or like, could you envision it being scaled up and like, because, you know, like what you were saying about protecting it from, you know, like the private sector and financial, like government, political interests?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because over COVID, we expanded so much. Being able to have different colleagues across Turtle Island and not specifically all located in Victoria was really powerful. I think we have really strong relationships with a lot of foundations. Like, we don't take corporate money, but we do take private money. And so fostering those relationships to the point where donors that we've had relationships with for years now are trusting in us and are like, here is some money, let us know how it goes. And that trust really reflects to us that that we're able to build those relationships. And I think, like, also being able to have the capacity to honor and compensate different knowledge forms. And I think that recognizing that is really important. I think that being able to name things is really important, but not keep those names stable. And one of those things is actually proper compensation. So I don't see expansion as a problem, but things look differently. Like, we are not decolonized. That is not what that's not it. It's a journey. It's constantly being confronted with, like, oh, shoot, that's not working. And even though it has worked last year, it's not working now. How do we adapt our programming? How do we adapt our organization? How do we lead with humility? I think it's proving to work.
Thank you. So I want to respect that there is another session that we should all go to. First of all, big thanks to all of the panelists. I know it takes time to pull things together and to think these things through. So thank you very much. And thank you everybody for coming and for being here right at the end, almost at the end of the conference. So big round of applause. Thank you.